Shalom. Welcome to Juan's World. No, I'm just kidding. This is the 7th episode, and it's a very special episode because it is my first Halloween special. Yep, you heard me right. We made it 2 months without getting bored of doing podcasts. Actually, it's really fun. I didn't think I'd enjoy it as much as I have because the reason I even started doing it was just because it's a consistent product that I can, constantly keep putting out. Yeah, and it's honestly just a fun experience, just being able to talk about whatever I want. People actually listening, which is kind of nice. I don't really know who is and who isn't, but thank you to everyone who's made it this far and continue to listen. So, on this episode, I decided I wanted to read off a couple stories that my great uncle wrote. He has this amazing book about our family's lineage. This is actually my grandfather on my mom's side, so his lineage, that side of my family, and the book's amazing. He goes into so much detail and even like the percentage of ethnicities that we fall under, and so it's really awesome. But when I was kind of reading through this when I was like in 4th grade, I found something that I thought was really interesting. It was tucked away in the book, kind of just sitting there. He has a couple of supernatural stories. In this particular story, he's talking about how his grandfather, he was a very big politician. This is up in Walsenburg, Colorado. And you're not in Colorado. It's a very small town. A lot of Spaniards. And so his father was a big politician, and he would do a lot of his speeches in Spanish as well as English. And he was not a very educated man. However, he was an amazing storyteller, by all accounts from this book. And he only got to a 6th grade level, but he was an amazing storyteller, an amazing speaker. And so, with these stories, that would be my great 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 grandfather. This is one of the stories that he told, and I'm going to tell it from the perspective of my great uncle. So I'll be talking in first person for this, even though this is not my account of the story, and all credit really is to my great uncle who did an amazing job writing this. It's definitely something awesome, and if you don't have something like this in your family, I encourage people to go out and look up their lineages, look at where they came from, and just kind of get back to the roots, get back to them humble beginnings. Look at where you came from, because there's a very, very few percentage of people in this country who have no lineage outside of the country. And I think just, it's kind of cool to see that, just to see where everyone came from, because these are people's lives. I mean, just like you and me, these people were living lives back then when, a cock killed you, and somehow they survived till adulthood, made babies, and here you are now. That's just the way the world works, and it's a pretty beautiful thing. Alright, well, I'll start with the story. One of the Bruja stories was about his uncle. It seems that this uncle wanted to attend a Saturday night dance, which involved having to travel 1 to 2 hours on horseback. It was already late, and there wasn't anyone else interested in traveling that distance. He expressed the problem to his friend, who promptly referred him to one of the neighborhood witches. He met promptly with the person he was referred to and told him about his situation. The brujo, which, if you're not familiar with Spanish, I think it's slang, though. I don't even think it's like a legit word. But bruja and brujo mean witches. So the brujo told him that getting him to the dance wouldn't be a problem if his instructions were followed closely. The brujo then got on all fours and told his uncle to get on him, as if he was mounting a horse, and to say that he was renouncing God and joining in with the devil, or something to that extent. The next thing the uncle remembered is being at the location of the dance. In another case, my dad said he was on his way to deliver some hay to one of the neighbors in a horse-drawn wagon. As he looked over to the side, he saw this ball of fire jumping from fence post to fence post. When it got ways ahead of my dad, the fireball jumped from the fence post to a spot under a pinon tree. The fireball went out just like that, as if someone had pulled a switch on it. When my dad got to that point in the road, he looked over to see an elderly man sitting there smoking a cigarette under the same pinon tree. My dad did not recognize him. Some of the older relatives and friends occasionally suggested that my dad might be embrujado, bewitched. Although somewhat skeptical but desperate, I finally gave in to these suggestions and started inquiring about an alvolario, or witch doctor. I was referred to a Mr. Cansino who lived on 8th Street in Walsenburg. As it turned out, he and my dad knew each other as a result of having worked in the same coal mine. They were actually good friends. You will recall from the previous discussion that there are supposedly two kinds of witches: the evil ones that can cast a spell or curse on someone, bewitch. Then there are the alvolarios, the good witches who practice medicine through magic. I have not been able to find the word for alvolario in any of the Spanish-English dictionaries. During our first visit with Mr. Cansino, he inquired mostly about my dad's friends and enemies and about matters pertaining to family relationships. At one point he corrected me when I used the word alvolario. He said he was a curandero, healer, and not an alvolario. After questioning us and performing a few prayer-like rituals, Mr. Cansino concluded that my dad was indeed embrujado, bewitched, and that he was, as a curandero, had the power to drive away the evil spell or curses. I was still skeptical, but after talking the situation over with my dad, other family members, I informed Mr. Cansino that we have decided to go ahead with the treatment, which involved weekly visits to his house at about $3 a week. I believe my dad had helped Mr. Cansino with his pension application, so he gave us a break on the fee. The treatments consisted of a variety of ritualistic activities. I remember that one of the early sessions I had to take him some small cedar tree branches, which he, therefore, used to drive away the evil spirits from the house. After about the fourth visit, Mr. Cansino said that he was going to show me who had cast the evil spell on my dad. I was instructed not to bring my dad to the next session. I was told, however, to bring a new water glass without any markings on it and an egg. When I arrived the next session, we chatted briefly. Then we moved to the kitchen table where Mr. Cansino filled the glass with tap water, broke the egg, separated the yolk, and dropped it in with the glass of water. The yolk dropped to the bottom. Mr. Cansino then had me look into the glass of water with instructions to concentrate on staring at the yolk. After a few seconds, I saw what looked like a shadow emerging from the egg yolk. This shadow slowly took the form of a man's and a woman's profile as they appeared to slowly float to the top of the water. It looked as if a photograph had been slightly immersed in the water. The profiles were clear enough for me to be able to recognize them as those two persons well known to the family. This was an unnerving experience which I had to share with someone, but who would ever believe me? After a great deal of thought and soul-searching, I concluded that Mr. Cansino had hypnotized me, so I asked him if I could have my brother-in-law, Bob Sandoval, which I'm going to stop right there. That's actually my great-grandfather who passed away in, I believe, the early 70s. Due to a car crash. My grandpa was only about 12 years old when that event took place. But I'm gonna talk about that event later on. Anyway, I'm gonna start again. Share the same experience. Mr. Cansino laughed and said in Spanish, "You're not convinced, are you? Of course you can bring your brother-in-law. You can bring anyone you want." Bob was not informed about what to expect. Mr. Cansino performed the same ritual with him in my presence. Bob also saw the profile of a man and a woman. He didn't know the two people involved, but his description fit exactly what I had seen. The most obvious descriptor was the man's hat with a wide band and the brim folded down in front. After a great deal of discussion, Bob and I felt that we needed a third witness, so I asked my mother to accompany us on a little trip to Mr. Cansino's. She wasn't told what to expect either. Mr. Cansino put her through the same routine. Her initial reaction was the same as mine. She was, however, more skeptical and privately dismissed the whole affair as the work of the devil. Since there didn't seem to be any noticeable changes in my dad's condition, the visits to Mr. Cansino were gradually phased out. It was difficult, however, for me to completely disregard the curiosity about what I had experienced, so I continued visiting and discussing witchcraft with Mr. Cansino. During one of those discussions, Mr. Cansino said, "You still don't believe what you saw in that glass, do you?" Without waiting for a response, he added, "If you will carefully follow my instructions, I will show you something that will forever erase any doubt you may have about my power as a curandero." He then asked, "Do you have a picture of a woman that lives out of town?" My response is yes. "I have a picture of a girl I went to school with now that lives in California." He said, "Bring me that picture, and I'll have that girl here in Walsenburg following you around like a little dog in less than a week." After some thought, my response was that he had proven his point, and I couldn't go through with something like that. Mr. Cansino laughed and muttered the Spanish equivalent of "put up or shut up." That was not the end, however, of the eerie and unexplainable incidents. The reader will recall from a previous discussion that, according to legend, brujas, witches, can transform their appearance to that of a bird or animal. The owl, for some reason, has been most often associated with witchcraft, although I'm aware of a few stories where the witches turned themselves into a dog, or in some instances, a ball of fire, as previously noted. In any event, we lived at 600 Colorado Avenue in Walsenburg. In more than 14 years at that location, we had never heard an owl in the neighborhood. Then one morning, my mother asked if anyone had heard an owl hooting that night. Mine was the only response, and I said that I had heard it. There was very little discussion, other than to agree that the hooting was coming from the direction of the garage and the backyard. After that brief exchange, everyone acted as if nothing unusual had happened. The owl was back. However, the following night and for several nights thereafter, over about a 2-week period, still the family didn't discuss the matter. After the brief exchange, everyone acted as if nothing unusual had happened. The owl was back, however, the following night and for several nights thereafter. We were in denial. We didn't want to believe what we were thinking. Sometime later, I remember from stories I heard as a youth that you can't shoot a witch with a rifle unless the back end of the bullet is marked with a cross. By that time, I was a believer, so you can guess what happened next. I used a screwdriver to etch out a cross on 5 bullets, without letting anyone know my intent. I was going to be ready the next time that owl showed up. That was not to happen, however. The weapon that was ready for the owl now belongs to my youngest son, Michael. It's a .22 caliber single-shot bolt-action rifle with which my dad brought from Montgomery Ward for $7 in about 1937. That rifle has been used to shoot a lot of rabbits, but not once has it been used to shoot an owl. It is doubtful that will ever happen. In the meantime, in what seemed as a final act of desperation, we consented to electric shock therapy for my dad. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. It would seem that this would be the end of my story about owls and fireballs, but evidently, it wasn't meant to be that way. There was some more to come. In 1968, I experienced another fireball incident on the road between Santa Fe and Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is how it happened. Reyes Tijerina, the Chicano activist, was in his prime. They were having a big fundraising weekend rally for him in El Paso, Texas. I don't recall exactly how it happened, but 4 of us decided to go see what Tijerina was all about. It was Don, his wife, June, and Andy, not the real names. We started out late one Friday evening. Andy was driving. I was riding in the front passenger seat, and Don and June were in the back seat. We were a happy bunch, having a good time talking, joking around, and laughing. They got me started on my witch and ghost stories, which were taken lightly, and were all the source of a lot of teasing and a lot of laughter. They wondered aloud how I could come up with such whompers. There was a stretch of road between Santa Fe and Albuquerque that was being worked on. It was in bad shape, slowing us down at times to about 15 to 20 miles an hour. It was already kind of late at night, so there wasn't much traffic on the road. I was in the middle of one of my witch stories as we approached a car coming from the opposite direction with only its park lights on. All of a sudden, Andy, in an excitement voice, said, "Look at that!" What we saw was a ball of fire coming through one of the windows on the driver's side of the car. It landed right in the middle of the road about 30 feet ahead of us. Andy had to swerve a little to the right to keep from hitting it. After going past it about 40 feet, I told Andy to stop. We looked back and the ball of fire was still there in the middle of the road. I told Andy to back up towards the object. As we backed up, the ball got smaller and smaller until it was completely gone. By the time we got to the spot, since Dan was sitting on the right side of the car, I told him to open the door to see if there was anything out there. He said, "No, let's just get on our way. We've got a long ways to go yet." That was just a natural phenomenon. Another way of saying, "I'm scared as hell. Let's get out of here before you cause something else to happen." We headed south again, and everyone was as quiet as can be. Finally, Jane asked, "What in the world was that?" Except that's not the word that she used for world. "That was one of those brujas I've been telling you about for the last hour and a half, but instead of believing me, you guys thought it was funny and laughed it off. Now do you believe?" One thing was for certain, I had the last laugh the day. I'll have to admit, I was kind of rattled myself. I've thought about that incident many times in an effort to come up with a reasonable explanation. The only thing I can come up with is more questions. One thing that does stand out is timing. How is it that the ball of fire appeared at exactly the same time that I was talking about brujas having the ability to turn themselves into that very thing, a fireball? Did it have anything to do with the power of suggestion? Was it our imaginations playing tricks on us? Who knows? The only sure thing is that all 4 of us saw the same thing at the same time. Now back to the owls. The reader is reminded that the owl incident mentioned above occurred in about 1957. There was a long period of silence until my sister Priscilla's husband, Bob, died 16 years later, March 5th, 1973, as a result of an automobile accident. She and her children vividly recall that at the time of the death they heard an owl for the first time since they had lived in the same house on Pennsylvania Street. The hooting came from somewhere on the right side of the house. Like in the years before, they continued off and on over a 2-week period. The children were totally unaware of the first incident, so there was no way they could have made an imaginary connection. Priscilla said that the kids eventually became so frightened that they wouldn't go to bed by themselves. This is like just due to the fact that this is my very close family, like my grandpa and my uncles. This kind of hits really close to home for me, just to think that they just lost their father, and now that they're all kids and they're hearing this owl and they don't know what it is. It's just that mystery of just something tragic happening, and then unable to comprehend like this other kind of phenomena or what's happening. But I'll continue. At about the same time that my father started on the road to recovery, my mother was diagnosed as having Parkinson's disease. We were determined to keep her at home as long as possible, but the disease gradually progressed to the point where she needed 24-hour care. My father, 2 sisters, and my brother Lee were living in Walsenburg at the time, and I was living in Pueblo. Shout out to Pueblo. The heaviest burden of taking care of my mother was falling on them. We did hire some outside help, which provided some relief. Nonetheless, I brought my mother to Pueblo for a few days. Lo and behold, she hadn't been in Pueblo more than a couple days when an owl suddenly appeared one night hooting from somewhere in our backyard. We had never heard an owl in our neighborhood, nor have we heard one since. This occurred a couple months before my mother died, on August 24th, 1974. After the 1974 owl incident in Pueblo, nothing else happened until our brother Lee died on August 17th, 1980. This time it was my sister Viola's turn to have to deal with the hooting owl that perched itself on a tree next to her house. This can probably be explained away by the fact that she lived in an area which had a large number of big trees, and she has, in a few instances, heard owls hooting off in the distance, but never that close to her house. While discussing the subject of brujas and owls one day, Priscilla and I admitted to each other that, because of all our experiences, our attitude towards owls, even the ones in zoos, is one of suspicion and contempt. Many of the players in what had been a real-life drama for my family had died. My mother and father and brother had died. Mr. Cancino passed away about 6 or 7 years ago. It is doubtful that there will be any more owl incidents, but who knows? The brua or brujo, or both, might still be alive. I know that the 2 people I saw in the glass of water are both dead. I have never revealed their names and probably never will. It would create too much unnecessary controversy and dissension. So yeah, that's the story. That's how it all happened. Owls play a big part in that. If you hear hooting owl, just think of my family's experiences with it and think about crazy stuff that can happen. Even something as simple as an animal can be the source of your terrors, But I don't want to talk a lot about this. I kind of just want to leave you guys with that. Just thinking about that, maybe going back or listening to it one more time. But I don't want to talk a lot about this. I kind of just want to leave you guys with that. Just thinking about that, maybe going back or listening to it one more time. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and happy Halloween.